could come through. Some of the stuff that we hear when you talk about disruption. What does disruption mean? You've got to understand that fully. And the digital disruption is the biggest one that happens now. But there are other, like health disruptions, etc., that we need to understand some of the keywords that would mean people are discussing those particular things. And that allows us to pick up information that could be important for us in serving in the boards where we are. So the individual performance of us as board members in terms of our own role of gathering information is very important. Over and above what you're being given by the organization in terms of giving you the newspaper cuttings, links onto information on the internet, and so forth and so on. So again, in terms of board intelligence, there are other areas as well that we need to be very conscious of as a board. A lot of boards have got company secretaries or lawyers who are working for them, and it is important that they understand what you want. They will not just do stuff. Your company secretary is not just going to do things because they feel that that is what you want. You as a person and you as a board and as a member of the board must be able to tell the company secretary or whoever it is that is looking after you in an organization that I would really like to get information about this and follow up and make sure you get it. I sit on boards that are quite diverse, and I'm not an expert in any of those areas. But I happen to be very inquisitive about what happens in those areas. I have sat on a board that was a bank. I cut my teeth in the oil industry, but I was able to pick up a lot of things in the first year sitting on that board around some of the sensitive areas that a bank was sensitive in. And I made it my business to read up in the newspapers. Whenever I saw certain words, I'd read up those articles. And that gave me a lot of information about now the industry that I was involved in. But it also took me into some areas that were completely new to myself. When you talk about money laundering, you talk about proceeds of crime, etc., etc. Those things can affect any other organizations that you have. They are key in a bank. But when you talk about your own organizations, whether you're in a business of making beer or in a business of selling tires and all the rest of it and so forth, the proceeds of crime could be laundered through your organization. Now, it may be something that you would never consider that kind of organization could be a place where that happens. And you've seen what has happened in some of the terrorist attacks in the country, how people very cleverly use some very, very innocent places to launder their money. So one has to be really very broad-minded and educate themselves, and then use the triggers, or the words of triggers to be that I talked about earlier, to allow you to get information, listen to conversations, or get involved in conversations that will help you broaden your own mind as a board member, and then you can contribute. Now, imagine all the board members doing that. The amount of intelligence that you bring in to a board is quite formidable. And it means that as a board, you're then able to function a lot more effectively in discharging your duty to the shareholders in terms of what you've been told to do for them, but also in supporting management, whereby they're operating on a day-to-day basis and running the business. But here you are armed with a lot of information that you can be probably able to guide them to look at certain things that maybe they would not know because they're busy running the operations. But you've got the time to gather that intelligence and translate it into what you see as risks or opportunities for that particular company. And educating oneself is another thing and about intelligence. Board intelligence is all around what you do as an individual. And also, as we talked about, on the information that can come in. And so even just you yourself broadening your understanding of the environment and then bringing that information to work with you as a board member in whichever board actually will enhance the ability of the board to work better and protect the interests of the company. And I'll tell you for myself, it actually improves your worth in a board. When you are able to articulate risks, opportunities based on the intelligence that you have, and that intelligence could even be other boards. Now, people always talk about conflict of interest between organizations and so forth and so on. But when I listen to a particular area, I can apply some of that knowledge in another board without conflict. But we as board members have to be very, very careful when that happens. And sometimes you may have to disclose that that information has come from a potential organization that you are involved in yourself, although they may not be in competition with that, but with the two organizations may not be in competition with each other, but the information that comes from one to the other may be complementary and actually create a bigger business opportunity for both organizations if the information you have was applied equally to both of them. And this is a very slippery slope that if you get it wrong, you fall into conflict of interest immediately. So that you should only apply when you have a lot more experience in terms of governance and the way governance works between one board and another. I would like to now turn to what I call intelligence in the broader sense, and that is more around artificial intelligence. Because that is when you talk about the future of our world and of the areas that we operate in. Artificial intelligence is also something that can make the performance of a board more efficient. And how would this work in terms of making artificial intelligence work for a board? It's a relatively new area, and the key thing that artificial intelligence can do for a board is to make it possible for the board to look at future trends. And instead of doing the analysis by yourself or the people in the company having to do it, you can actually create algorithms that work for you as a board in terms of the area that you're interested in. And a lot of things are already using artificial intelligence. You begin to, people like supermarket cashiers and taxi drivers will eventually be phased out as artificial intelligence takes over and comes into our lives. Look at what happened with Uber, right? They used technology and stuff like that to phase out the traditional taxi driver that you have. And if you remember the taxi drivers in London who used to operate because they had they had the information that allowed them to be able to navigate the whole city. And until you are very good at that, you would not be given a license by their association to operate as a taxi driver. And in comes Uber, where you don't need that information. And it basically meant that it was almost like a shift to artificial intelligence using Google Maps and whatever it is to be able to tell people where you are. And everything that we do in a lot of instances now has got some essence of artificial intelligence. But this is stuff that eventually, and is already happening in boards, whereby a lot of data and crunching of data is being done using some algorithms that will select, once it's cracked the data, it will select the outcomes of the information that comes out of that data that is relevant to a particular board. And these tools are beginning to come through in the various board apps that companies are getting. A lot of us use those board applications purely as repositories for board papers and getting all our meeting information and where we get all the data. So they're more like a data storage and a data transfer between us and the company and between ourselves as a board when we can talk to each other on that platform, which are the board apps. But a lot of those are now able, when configured with the owners of those apps, they can begin to search intelligently amongst the information that is present around the world and give you some very, very strong insights about the trends that are emerging within your business. But also, sometimes the threats that can come that are heading towards your business. In this day and age, one of your salesmen can make or one of your managers or one of the employees in a company can make a very careless statement somewhere, and then it trends on social media, and by the time it may trend not at the top level, but it may just be lurking below the surface, but it is getting a lot of airtime. And by the time you as a board or even the leadership of the organization get to know about it, the damage has been done. So it is necessary that rather than wait for for those things to appear or somebody to send you to forward to you a particular activity, you use artificial intelligence structured the way you as a board would want it, although I'm using one which is at the management level, but you look at what the board would want and you structure the algorithms to distill out of all the data that is available around the world the kind of intel that you as a board would want to use. When you look at, for example, the development of the markets, say the financial markets, the financial services, or even beauty products, there are certain key things that are happening that maybe individually would not make sense. But if you use artificial intelligence and combine all these bits of information, it will tell you that the market is going in a particular way. I remember about 7-8 years ago when I joined the board of a personal care organization. I was active on social media. I was seeing things that are going on, and I asked and said, when are you going to be active in men's personal grooming products and getting them to sort of think about perfume products, etc., etc.? And they said, no, that wouldn't happen. And I told them, just go and check, do your intel, look through all the stuff that you had. And they just went and did the traditional stuff. And I think within about a year, they realized that, in fact, if you looked further than just the traditional places where you look for information, which is amongst your competitors and seeing what they're doing, that is a very limited use of artificial intelligence. But if you go beyond just looking at your competitors and you looked at the customer, the very, very wide customer base that you have within your own country, but then you also look at similar trends in other parts of the world. If that is what you wanted as a board to say, fine, where is the market in which we as a company operate going? You would actually cause that to happen. And that would be looked at on a regular basis. That information will come on a regular basis to you. And that helps you in terms of looking at strategy, looking at a strategic direction and beginning to understand, are we still in the right place? And right now, for example, a lot of us are moving away from strategy and going more into a situation where you're looking at dilemmas, you're looking at opportunities that could happen. And these dilemmas could happen. And you select the current one at that point in time. And then you develop scenarios. So I was talking about scenarios. When you look at scenarios going forward, those scenarios are looking very far ahead. But if you have algorithms that work for you in terms of gathering a large amount of data, it means that when you're looking at those algorithms at the future, you have less uncertainty in terms of what you're looking at because of the algorithms and the intelligence that you're getting out of those in terms of what could be happening in your market. So in areas of predicting where the market is going, in areas of looking at risk, and there's a whole host of other areas, data-driven decision-making is becoming the way that companies are working, but also boards are going in that particular way. There are not very many boards in this country that are actually using artificial intelligence to help them get data that will allow them to better interpret and look at the opportunities that the shareholders may be wanting them to look at, right? Even when you're looking at assessing the financial performance, Sometimes it may be necessary to just get some simple algorithms to help you look at that. Your financial gurus in the company may be telling you one thing, but when you have somebody who is not trying to tell you or move you in a particular way of thinking, then you get raw data that allows you to make the decision. So as boards, I mean, I'm coming to conclusion now. As boards, we really need to start looking at artificial intelligence to help us to make more decisions as I am in the areas that we operate. And all that is not necessarily purely about our own business. It is about the total business environment. And some insights that come out of using artificial intelligence that can be applied to a board are such that it will make us even understand some of the side opportunities that could be available to us as a company or as a board in the future. It may even mean that you may change the direction or start discussing a major change in the direction of the strategy that you have. Even before you're seeing the ripples of that in the normal operations of the organization. So I'd like to wind down by just talking about the key things I've given you today. One, artificial intelligence is very much becoming something that as boards, we need to start considering bringing them into our arsenal for helping us make decisions. Secondly, there's a lot of things that we as individual board members need to do in order to be able to have that fine antenna out that allows us to pick up information in the least expected places. And that is just where you're living your normal life. And then finally, within the company itself, you need to set up structures that allows you information to come in, either through reports that you're getting from the company secretary or the CEO, but it should be structured to help you as a board. And the way it can help you is by you understanding the strategic direction of the company, some of the scenarios you're looking at, and what kind of information you need to tell you whether the strategy that you originally had is still working, whether the scenarios that you consider every time you're reviewing your strategies are still the valid ones for the future. And that way, as a board, you will be more efficient, you'll be more forward-looking, and you'll really add value to the management that you're working with, as well as the shareholders. When you talk to them during an annual general meeting, or if it's a private company, when you're having your shareholders meeting, it will always help that you are able to talk above the day-to-day activities, but that you have a lot of intelligence, market intelligence, internal intelligence, and also just intelligence within the board that allows you to rise above today and be able to talk about tomorrow in a very authoritative way. And the more people see things around what you said, and you said, it may not be evident now, but in a bit of time, because of these things that we have seen, these are likely to happen. And the more of those likely to happen, the more confidence the shareholders and management will have in you as a board. And that way, the conversations that you have with those, with the stakeholders that you're burdened to, will become a lot more constructive, and the level of trust that is in there will also mean that they will also give you a lot more information that they would normally hold back, hoping to beat you over the head with that. So Judy and all the members here from the Women on Boards Network, thank you very much for giving me an opportunity to talk to you a little bit about my view on the intelligence that is available to boards. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Engineer Obath, for that really illuminating talk. I like that we've gone from, where we just used to get the rules, keeping abreast with rules and regulations, to newspaper cuttings, all the way down to algorithms, AI, social media. I mean, you've taken us through an entire journey of how to keep abreast with information and use it for the benefit of the company. Ladies, I want to open up the session to the Q&A. We had requested that you post your questions on the chat session, the chat box. Please do so, but I could also allow anybody with a question to just put up their the virtual hand, and we'll give you the opportunity to do so. In the meantime, I think I could pose the first question. This board intelligence, it looks like something that a board member as an individual would have to take the initiative to do. Is there a way, or have you, in your experience, seen, for instance, a company having an intelligence officer who's able to gather all this intelligence, put it together, and present it to the board, for instance? Or are there, platforms that, those apps that you're talking about that can gather this information and, break it down into good reports that the board can use?
My first encounter with that was we used our advertising agency. That was the first place that and they tend to do a lot of, they do a lot of crunch numbers and do this. So the advertising and marketing team tend to have a lot of numbers. And so that was the first place that we went to in terms of getting data. If you have an agency that is serving different businesses, it means that when they're looking at, they're scanning the data front and trying to put it together, they'll have a much wider range rather than getting an agency that is specialized in your line. And if you look at a lot of these agencies these days, they've got a wide range of specialists looking at a lot of things. So that's the first place that that one would go to. But in the recent years, I think in the last 10 years or so, as board apps have become the way that boards are operating, those organizations that actually provide you with the applications, the board applications, are becoming a lot more savvy. And what they've done, they've actually they've combined their own work in governance and giving you data, and they work with people like Reuters and all these other organizations that have got a massive database, because that is what they do. And then they work with them and they look for a service that they can then put together, and they provide you the intelligence based on what you want them to do for you. So there is, and this is becoming, there's a lot more people who are now getting into that space, other than just the people who provide board apps. A lot of your large accounting firms and people like that are beginning to also broaden out into that. If you remember that a lot of times we used to conduct surveys for salaries, for example, and they used to be done over about 40 or 50 companies, and then that was then sanitized so that you could see where you sit in that whole area. So there's a lot of organizations that have done those kind of things, but very much specialized in their own area, like HR people. But now those same organizations, the PwCs and EYs and all the rest of them, BKFs of this world, are now widening their mandate because they have a lot of practices together, and those practices combined could actually be turned into an opportunity of providing intel for companies. I hope that has given you some insight.
Yes, indeed. And it actually even reminds me of the R&D departments. When you talk about marketing, you do find a lot of companies had the R&D departments where they would go out and do the market surveys and so on, and use that information. One of the questions on the charts, I see here, Grace Mwendwa is saying that one of the issues that has always baffled me is frauds that go on for a long time unnoticed by board members. How can the board intelligence be used to be able to make it easier to curb these instances from occurring? So this is where we should be getting the intelligence from internal, Yeah.
A board is not geared to do fraud. The company, the organization, is the one that is geared to detect fraud. However, the direct reports of the board, who are the ones who are supposed to manage the rest of the company, could be doing that, but they themselves could be involved in fraud. I personally had a situation about 8 years ago, where the CEO and the COO of a company where I was sitting on the board colluded to commit a kind of a felony within the company, although it wasn't directly in the company, it was between two companies, and they arranged for something to happen. In fact, they arranged for two companies to do business with each other, and they became the under commission by making that arrangement, right? So there was nothing actually of fraud, but this was a situation whereby there was a conflict of interest. As a CEO in one company, you are creating a deal, and then the other company is paying you because of the deal between the two companies, and you become the arranger. Now, we would never, and I'd like to challenge anybody up to now, 8 years later, I haven't found a way where I could have predicted that our own CEO was doing that kind of thing. And there isn't anything that you would put there short of understanding that these guys had a private deal somewhere, and the only way we got to know about it was through a whistleblower. And that is why the whistleblowing system, when managed well, is such a key thing in terms of giving you that information. A lot of it may just be sort of people trying to sort of get one over each other, or trying to sort of bring somebody down because they have a personal grudge. But that always brings a lot of information up to the board. But let's just talk about fraud in the case of people that the board is directly working with. And these are some of just my own personal thoughts. When people commit fraud, they're trying to enrich themselves or enrich somebody and so forth and so on. And one of the biggest warning bells that should come through for a board to start looking and understanding what may be happening is if you've got a well or a reasonably paid leadership team that is reporting, which is the CEO and the CEO minus one, who are the people that the board would normally be involved in. And somewhere, again, this is I'm talking about outside, you see that their lifestyle has changed drastically, right? They've moved up from, say, a Toyota Corolla, and they're now driving a BMW X5, right? And whatever they're doing at work, really, and the bonuses they have not got them there. And you see a few of those kind of things happening. It would normally worry me now, especially having seen what happened 8 years ago, because that means that the person has all of a sudden had a big shift in the way they live. And I would be interested to find out why. And those are some of the things that you begin to look at as a board in terms of the fraud that is apparent to you in the face. I couldn't tell if the fraud was happening with a cashier, right? The systems in the company and the risk management system should take care of that. But when the people who are supposed to manage fraud in the company, they themselves, at that level, the board is supposed to tell the board, if they themselves are involved, that is purely in terms of lifestyle changes. And those are the ones, and little keys like that, that the board has got to be very, very conscious of. I mean, if somebody has been wearing, the kind of suits I wear, and all of a sudden he's wearing, Zagnelli or some whatever it is from Italy, those guys normally come here and measure people at the Serena, and you're getting, you're buying a suit at, $2,000-3,000, whereas normally they've been buying it at about $300 or $400. Those things are little triggers that will actually talk about detecting fraud. Otherwise, it is actually very, very difficult to do that. So you have to, as a board, to really understand the staff that are working directly with you, and then, like I now have those kind of triggers. Develop your own triggers that will tell you about how to look out for fraud.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Engineer. We have another question on the chat from Lina Monuze, and she says, thanks for the great insights, Engineer Oba. Would you share with us 2 differences you may have experienced in board intelligence in private against public sector boards, if any?
All right, I think the first and most glaring one, I think, is that in the private sector, you're allowed to design a lot more things by yourself as a board, and you have the freedom to do that, and you can you can do set up a lot of board intelligence activities in that manner. And the speed at which you can do it is much higher. In the public sector, it becomes it's a convoluted thing. Justifying getting a board intelligence system in a parastatal or in a government organization, people would think you're crazy. Yeah. Why do you want to get an AI system that is going to look after, the organization and the running of that organization? Whereas in the private sector, you can actually put a business case very quickly and do that. So I think the issue of making the business case for some of those systems is a big difference between the public and the private sector. And when you talk also about board intelligence in general, and this is I have to be careful what I say here. The private sector boards tend to be constituted in a manner where you have people who have been brought in targeting specific strengths, right, that the company may need, and then they change over time depending on the kind of value that the individual board members will bring to the business. When you look at the public sector, a lot of the boards that are selected there are more for rewarding people for political associations. And when you look at an average public sector board and you look at the composition of the board and you look at the company, a lot of times you find there's a mismatch. And therefore, when you start talking about board intelligence in terms of running a public sector company, the composition of that team may not necessarily design the intelligence that they need to run that business because they just don't know how to do it. And again, if you then talk about getting a consultant, the process is convoluted and you probably end up with the wrong consultant who is the right person but the wrong kind of consultant, if you get what I mean. So so those are some of the key things that I'd talk about is a difference between the public and private sector in terms of board intelligence. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I see a number of comments and questions on the chat. Having my eye on the time, I think we're doing well. Great presentation and sharing of insights, much appreciated from Alice Owar. Alice Regima also saying thank you for great contributions. Patricia Gaduri, thank you. Sophia Ngugi also saying thank you. Grace Mwendwa saying thank you. We have a question here from Patricia Waroe saying, she says, thank you for taking time in Junior Bath to share your leadership skills. My question is, how do you ensure that you get board buy-in from management and staff from a marketing agency perspective? How do you get board buy-in, management and staff from a marketing agency perspective?
When you select a marketing agency, that marketing agency must be selected for a good reason. And the good reason must be one that internally everybody subscribes to. So the person who started that process of saying we need a marketing agency, we need them to do certain things for us, needs to first of all get, as a management team and the staff working in, that yes, we need a management team of this description. And so long as they meet those specific, the specifications you put in, we believe they will deliver for us on what we want. And once everybody is aligned in terms of the search process, then the outcome should be one that everybody buys into. If it is a major decision that has to go to the board in terms of the agency that is doing that marketing, then that process has to also be opened up to the board so that whichever committee in the board is doing that, they should be fully appraised and understand why we are doing what we are. And because they are looking from an external perspective, they would also bring some insight into that selection process. Once they've done that and they're happy that the selection process has been done properly, when the agency is then selected, there shouldn't be any reason that anybody will doubt that that agency will deliver. And the key thing is when you're selecting them, their deliverables and the KPIs you're going to measure has got to be one that everybody subscribes to, at least the majority of people, so that when they begin to perform, you can begin to assess them regularly to see whether they're delivering value. So it is all around the process by where you get to selecting that agency. So internally, there's got to be that trust. There's got to be that agreement. There's got to be full alignment that the agency you're getting is the right one. A lot of times you find that people bicker because each of them thinks the agency should do something different. And if one powerful faction within the company then leads and says, we are the ones who have been charged with this, and therefore we are going to make the decision, and you live with it, you have started already a big fight in the company. So as leaders and as board members, those kind of things that you look at, you've got to be very careful and make sure that there is buy-in fully before you actually commit to an important thing such as a marketing agency. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next question I have here is from Olivia Adhiambo. She says, thank you, Engineer Bath, for the great insights. Intelligence is indeed a currency in and outside boards. ESG has become a prominent issue in companies. In your opinion, what intelligence would a board rely on to make decisions on ESG?
Can somebody remind me what ESG is?
Environmental social governance.
Environment,
social governance.
And governance. When you look at organizations and you look at the value of ESG, ESG tends to be used mainly by people who are investing in companies. And they look at your ESG performance. Now, if as a company, you want to be able to attract investments and to attract certain types of customers, attract certain types of stakeholders that you want to work with, then it is important that first of all, you understand what ESG means to your business in terms of the environmental impact that your business has. Do you fully understand what it is and what are you doing to ensure that you minimize that footprint? When you're looking at the social impact of the business, what are you doing in terms of, first of all, minimizing the negative social impact as a result of your activities? And secondly, in terms of the positive side, how are you making inroads into improving the social the social performance of the community that you're serving in or that you're working in? And then governance is obvious. I mean, that as a company, you've got to be able to show very, very leading edge governance. Now, if you do those and you do them and you document them and people are able to look at them, it means that when they come in to invest or to work with you, they think you are a worthy partner. So as a company, you've got to decide what value you get out of ESG. A lot of companies say ESG is a thing that is going on now. Let's go out and do ESG. And you do the whole hog when really you don't need to. You need to do parts of that that are important to your organization and make sure that when you do, they are very, very visible. It's just like looking at the SDGs. There are 17 of them. How many apply to a particular organization? Most organizations will pick 2 or 3 and focus on that because it does 2 things. One, it is right because it affects their business on a day-to-day basis, and it is something that they can do within the context of their business. They will not do the other 14 because for them it is really it is a distraction from them doing their business. But the ones that are fully aligned with what they're doing are the ones that you take on board and do. So the same thing with ESG. Make sure that you do it and you do the elements of ESG that will add value to you, but adding value to you in such a way that the people who will look at your ESG performance will see that you have made an effort to be able to track and demonstrate that you're actively working in the ESG arena. Thank you.
Thank you very much. ESG is an emerging area, I think, currently. Christine Wikali is bringing in a question on confidentiality, and she says confidentiality in board meetings. So she's giving a hypothetical situation here. She says the CEO colludes with a service provider and a board member, and decisions made in the board are leaked. How do you navigate such a scenario? And to add on to this question of confidentiality, how do you verify intelligence? Once information comes onto the board, maybe it's coming from another board member or from management. How do you verify? How are you able to say this is good information, we can rely on it? Don't forget, we are living in a world where there's a lot of fake news, a lot of information that is inaccurate out there. Who does the checking at the board level?
I think one of the key things, and let me answer the last one first, and then I'll go back to the issue of this of the three people who have decided to collude. When you talk about trust in terms of the intelligence that you're getting, it all relies on the people that you select to provide that intelligence. And that selection process has got to be designed in such a way that it assures that the people you're selecting have got a very high level of integrity. And secondly, that the processes they're going to use to get it are understood by yourselves. A lot of times, and I've done this in a few boards, when I do not understand something, I am entitled, if that board is mature, I am entitled as a member of the board to request for an expert to advise me as a board member in an area that I am not clued up on. And it is a right that I have as a board member, and the company will pay for it, because that is part of the support they give to me as a board member. So these are some of the things that when you're practicing as a board member, understand fully when you're signing your contract to go on a board, that those kind of clauses are there that will help you. Otherwise, if you don't have access to that and something goes wrong and you have not consulted a third party, you are culpable as a board member for having done all these things, brought them in without necessarily exercising due care in terms of discharging your role as a board member. So you don't have to be a know-it-all, but you need to have access to people who know it. And that's important as a board member. Don't go in as a board member and think you know everything. Even the best board member in the world doesn't know everything about the business in which they're in. And if you know everything about that business, you should be starting your own business as well. Now, coming to the other question about if a CEO colludes with a service provider and board member, and discussions from a board are leaked outside. A lot of times, if as a chairman of a board or a board member, you will know in terms of the dynamics of a board, there are certain people, and this is important for chairs of boards to understand each of the board members who are there, not in terms of prying on their personal lives and whatever it is and so forth, but just understanding the character of the nature of the nature and the character of the people gathered who you're supposed to be chairing and managing them. And part of what I call board development is that as people begin to work better, a board chair should begin to foster some kind of tension in the board, whereby you begin to be open about a lot of things. And I don't know whether Catherine is on the call, but one of the things that I always believe in when you talk about board evaluations is when you do a board evaluation, could you then look at the individual evaluations of every board member in an open board meeting? So that when you're discussing Patrick Obath as a board member, all the board members tell me what they think of me as a board member. Now that is a mature board. And the kind of scenario that is given would not happen in that, would be unlikely to happen in a board like that, because those things would not be leaked outside. You wouldn't need to leak it out. But if you are colluding with a service provider for that organization and you're telling them about what is happening in the board, I can tell you for free that within 2 to 3 weeks, you will know who it is who has leaked it out. It will become very obvious. And some of the things that you see in boards is when a matter like that is discussed, there'll be either somebody who is very, very vocal defending it, or very quiet and non-committal and not committing themselves to that discussion. And when people are at those extreme ends, when a thing like this becomes a very hot discussion in a board, and you start asking, who is it? I know it is one of us who leaked this matter out. CEO, you are here, you're part of that process. So we start with you and just look around the whole this whole gathering of the board. Which of us was responsible for making this happen? And I would, and I've done this before because this scenario has actually happened with me. And I've asked and say, can each of you swear on the Bible or some other way of holding them accountable to the statements they're going to make that you had nothing to do with this? And would you, if it happened that it was you, would you then resign from this board? And you just put it plainly like that and ask each of the board members, can you, Patrick Obath, tell me, given these circumstances, that you're not the one who leaked this information? Just that preamble that you give to asking that question should be enough to scare somebody there. And sometimes, and in the particular case that I talked about, somebody said, yes, Chairman, it was a mistake on my part, and this did happen, and so forth and so on. And at the end of it, we actually decided that that particular procurement with the service provider had not gone beyond a point where it was now corrupted fully. So we readjusted what we were doing and continued with the process. But by then we knew who it was who had done it. So I think every circumstance is always very peculiar, and I can't give a direct answer. But the one thing that always works for me is to just call that integrity, the integrity card, and then also call about the consequences in the case that when the integrity is called upon and is found lacking, that you accept that you'll be kicked out of the board, right? And it's done and minuted in the board meetings, and that way it normally brings forward a response. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. There's a question from Maureen Were, and she's asking, is it wise to use board intelligence to leverage into joining a board? Can it be a new seat at the table as it's a global emerging trend? I want to combine that question with another one from Caroline Nyamwaya. She's asking, as a new board member, how do you quickly increase your influence and impact?
I think there are actually two separate questions. The one about creating a board intelligence requirement, that you have somebody who's versed in that. If it is important for your business, and your business is relying a lot on intelligence and so forth, you would normally then create it within one of the committees, right? And you would then charge that committee with being the one that gathers data and information, and which then would influence the board reactions. A lot of the time, that kind of intelligence will be done within the business itself. And then that can be brought up into the board. And then a board member who is brought in can be, you could actually bring in a board member or even a consultant who can help you work on that. It doesn't have to be a board member, because board intelligence isn't a day-to-day thing that the board does all the time, unless you're in a very, very dynamic industry that changes from time to time. And that is probably going to be the future. And I think the person who asked that question may be asking us to have a look at it in the future, because with the technology becoming the bedrock of most businesses, and the fact that technology is changing so rapidly, and the fact that artificial intelligence also means that the decisions you're making could be right today and wrong tomorrow, because based on the intelligence you have. Yes, if you're in that kind of if that is the way that your business is run, yes. Some businesses may not need it because there's a very long-term issues that will take a lot of time to change, and the intelligence can then be done on a need-to basis using external agencies. So again, there isn't a cut and dried answer, but I think yes, those are some of the things that will begin to come through, and then you kick out others that have been traditionally there. Like, you talk about an intelligence committee instead of a marketing committee, right? And stuff like that. So there'll be a change, and I agree, yes. In terms of, what is the other one? Increasing your influence as a board member when you come in.
Yes, yes.
I think the first thing, when you come into a board, you must come in because of certain credentials that you have that brought you in. Now, if those credentials, if the board selection has been good, the first day, the day you open your mouth in the board for the first time, you make your maiden speech, there should already be a lot of stuff that is coming out that establishes your niche and the reason you came in to that board. When I went into the board of the bank, Standard Chartered, I was brought in because of commodities. And the big commodity at that time was fuel. But when you talk about the commodity of fuel, you've also got all other commodities that are looked at in a similar way. And I then had to learn about the other commodities very quickly. And within a very short time, I could talk about fuel, I could talk about maize, I could talk about gold, I could talk about all those things as commodities. I had to learn very quickly and look at the difference in terms of the commoditization of oil, X, Y, Z, and all those things. And when I realized that is why I went in as a commodity, of oil as a commodity, I then decided let me also become very knowledgeable in commodities in general. And that means that over time, people look at you as that commodity expert. Although I went in as an oil industry person, and oil was a very, very big foreign exchange consumer in the country. And that means obviously that is knowledgeable. And then I designed a very simple thing. I designed and said, let us look at 5 big buckets that could influence this organization. So now got everybody to bring in the expertise, and each of us gave ours. And we designed a simple form, 5 big things, and then we looked at what you call the limits that would make us worry. So if it goes below this or goes above that, that becomes a discussion. And then we scan it regularly. So yes, you can use your knowledge that you came in with to create your niche and make it very strong, but then also use that to then start getting other people to think in a particular way. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We are also live on YouTube, and I have a number of comments also coming in from YouTube. I see our founder chair saying, great insights, Patrick. There's Zippy Musimi. She says, I like the angle of AI. Thanks, Patrick. Again, Catherine is saying market intelligence, social intelligence, artificial intelligence, emotional intelligence, external and internal intelligence. Awesome. Joyce Kibe is saying great. Emily Manduku also likes the AI angle. Leah Chepkoske says great. Emilia again says a robust management of change will be needed in boards to embrace the emerging technological changes. And Caroline Mwanzi says, people think playing the integrity card no longer works. Great to see that it works. Interesting tips there on observing for the real quiet members or the very talkative ones when the heat is on. And Gladys Ogola says, very true. So I'll take just a few other comments from the chats here. Nancy Warima is asking which short courses can one take to understand more about boards. I think Nancy is in good company. We are the women on boards. We should be able to hook you up with some of our governance courses. And before we end this call, I'll be telling you more about the upcoming events. We have Rebecca Ann Minor says, very insightful session. Is there a standard format on board reporting? Here she's asking about HR reports. Maybe you can say something quickly on that, but again, we do have a very robust governance course, which takes us through all these issues, including board reporting. Patricia Gaduri talks about, she says, board member evaluations in our public sector board are done annually. We just had one today, and the results and feedback for each individual are normally shared. Where was I? Normally shared in a full board meeting. So this goes back to the issue that you presented on evaluation, board evaluation, and the 360 where you get peer evaluation as well. Sarah Kieno says, great presentation, Patrick. Rebecca Likami, thank you, engineer. I think that's what we have so far. One other one, Rosemary Odo says, clearly all board members are responsible for collecting board intelligence in our everyday lives, whether it is in reading business news, looking out, catching up with latest tax requirements, etc., and so on. Quite insightful. A lot of other comments on this. There's a question here, is there an all-round board governance course? Again, good company. Women on Boards does have a very good governance course. We should be giving you more information on this. And I'll be sharing on our upcoming events. I think we've come to the end of this session, and I will be calling upon one of our founder members to give a vote of thanks. Before I do that, I will be giving an announcement of the upcoming events, as well as, and as I get those out, I want to invite our founder chairperson, Catherine, to say a quick hello. We always like to hear from her before we then get the upcoming event and the vote of thanks.
Thank you very much, Judy. Good evening, everybody. Patrick, wow, thank you. Thank you so much. I got slightly late coming into this call because I was speaking to lady engineers, and they sent me, by the way, to say hello to you. And I couldn't get in, so I was getting really flustered, but then the YouTube channel came, so I was able to follow. And I think the session has been awesome. Thank you so much, Patrick. I will not be surprised if members demand a repeat of this. It has really been an awesome session, a greenfield, so to speak, with very new ideas coming through. And we, on behalf of the Board of Women on Boards Network, want to thank you most sincerely for speaking to us this evening, and for everybody who took the time to actually come and be part of this session. Thank you so much, and God bless. Thank you, Judy.
Thank you very much, Chair Lady. I also want to invite Olivia Thiambo. She was to give the vote of thanks. Olivia, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Judy. On behalf of Women on Board and everyone who is either watching live or in this Zoom call, I would like to say a big thank you to Engineer Obath. You have broadened our knowledge. I now personally will not take for granted my intelligence sources. We are leaving the meeting better equipped to serve in boards and also in our various professional capacities. And on behalf of everyone, who have joined the call, I want to just say thank you for the time you have taken and for the great insights and experiences that you have shared. And we hope that you will be engaging more in future on this and many other topics. Thank you very much, Engineer Obath.
Thank you very much, Olivia. We do have upcoming events and programs. The first that I want to inform you about is a corporate governance crash program. So everybody who was asking about corporate governance course, there's one coming up on 5th to 9th of September. We also have another talk, part of our board talk series. This will be on 13th October, and information will be shared in due time. Finally, we have the Women on Boards Awards for 2022. This will be held on 25th November 2022, but we are then being requested to send in our nominations for both individuals and organizations. And we do look forward to celebrating each one of us and the ladies who are promoting gender diversity and inclusivity. On my own behalf and on behalf of the Women on Boards, I want to say this was a
Judy.
Yes.
Judy, before you close,
okay.
Just to remind our members, if you haven't joined our coterie, please do reach out to the Secretariat. Coteries, for those who don't know what they are small groups that hold each other accountable and help each other to, to grow in your board leadership journey. So please reach out to the Secretariat so that you're assigned a coterie. If you have been assigned one, but it's not working as well as you think it ought to, please reach out to us. We also have another type of coterie which we have recently launched for a trial period of 6 months. If you want to be part of that, please take advantage. The communication has been on the wall. So do reach out so that we grow together. And for those who have joined the call this evening and who are not our members, please reach out to us on our website, www.womenonboardskenya.co.ke. I know Kantai will type it out. You will get all the information about Women on Boards Network there, and you can also get the membership form there. Please do join. Let's make this a movement. Let's change the narrative about boards and let's grow together. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I see the corporate governance course link is already on the chat, so please have a look. There's the Women on Boards website link is also there, and there's also the question on the WhatsApp. Yes, there's a WhatsApp group, and the information has also been provided on the chat. I want to thank our guest speaker of this evening, Engineer Obath. That has been a great session. I knew it would be an eventful and illuminating evening. So we thank you for your time. I also wish to thank all the ladies who joined on the call and a few gents. I think I've seen a few gents on the call. Thank you for being with us this evening. And as we close, as our chairperson has said, let us join the movement and work on this diversity and inclusion on boards. Thank you very much and have a good evening.
Thank you, Judy. Thank you, Secretariat, for making this happen. Asante sana.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.